Hello, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, DwyerVIP.com for premium picks. Look us up in the sports section on Roku. We're there. Dwyer Boxing and Sports News. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, there are certain things that the mainstream press, because of the format, really can't address. Right? The mainstream press, the commentators on these boxing channels want you to be a viewer. Right? They want you to watch HBO, Showtime, cable stations like ESPN, NBC Sports. They want you to be into the sport. They want you to believe that the fight you're about to see is a competitive fight. Now, it's very hard in that context, especially when the commentators themselves are talking with the fighters, for there to be an open discussion on whether a fighter is what's called a shot fighter. Right? It's very hard to openly question whether the fighter should hang it up, whether it's over for the fighter, whether the fighter is no longer first class, when you're going to have to interview that fighter, possibly after the fight. Let's say the fighter has a punch, is getting by having a puncher's chance in fights. Let's say he delivers the punch. Doesn't mean he's not a shot fighter. Right? In the post-fight interview, good luck trying to say, gee, Jerry, are your reflexes the same? Were you lucky in this fight? Isn't it true that you're a shell of who you used to be? Now, I bring this up because, in my opinion, and let's just be straight here, this is the internet. In my opinion, Juan Manuel Lopez is past his prime. I think he is, again, the term, a shot fighter. Doesn't mean he can't win fights. Doesn't mean he can't win this fight. But what it does mean is that he couldn't come within the area code of beating a younger version of himself. And there are certain things that will place him at risk in fight after fight. Understand, there's a difference between having a bad night and being a shot fighter with structural problems that are going to resurface time and time again. Skills can hide it. Right? If I have good defense and stuff like that, you might not be able to notice the problems I'm having in the ring. Right? But at the end of the day, even skills can only do so much. Let's talk about how you can tell whether a fighter is a shot fighter. And let me just point out, Father Time is going to catch up with all of us. As Jim Morrison famously said, no one here gets out alive. Right? Now, let me just say, I believe it's a mistake to look at a fighter's age and then from his age to reach the conclusion on whether they're a shot fighter. Right? We've all seen relatively young guys who, quite frankly, ended up being shot fighters. I remember watching a Terry Norris fight years ago, and Terry didn't look like Terry. Right? The skills seemed to have deteriorated a bit too dramatically. Then, of course, Terry started slurring his speech. and it was obvious something was wrong. So how do you spot a shot fighter? A guy who might have some neurological situation going on that will be ongoing and will prevent him from reaching the heights he once reached. I know it sounds tough. This is a tough sport. The truth is a tough topic. Let's try to tackle it. When you see a defensive lack of reflexes, in other words, the guy's on defense in the ring, he's facing an opponent, and he's just not adapting in any way, shape, or form to what his opponent is doing. He's getting hit flush. You really see it by the lack of neck muscles, right? The lack of tensing. Normally when a fighter sees a punch and he's about to get hit, that fighter will stiffen up, right? You want to make sure that you're stiff so you're able to take the punch, right? Skilled fighters will roll with the punch. In other words, they'll stiffen up, they'll know the punch is coming, and they'll roll with the punch. So as the punch hits, they're taking some of the velocity out of the punch, right? Those are the alert fighters. A shot fighter doesn't have the reflexes. They'll see the punch coming. They won't be able to do anything about it. You'll be able to tell because the guy's head will snap back. He'll get hit as if he didn't know something was coming. He'll get hit flush, unable to get out of the way, unable to react. With shot fighters, you'll notice something else too. They get hit, let's face it, in every fight. Some guy's going to get hit flush, hit by surprise. But alert fighters will then react to it. Right? They'll get hit even if they're not rolling with the punch. And then they'll do something. Immediately throw a punch back. Right? Turn it into a shootout. Maybe they'll get hit, then they'll duck. Right? I know it doesn't quite make sense, but they'll take some action to protect themselves, right after they get hit. With shot fighters, the reflexes aren't there. There's a pause. They get hit. Sometimes they'll just stand there. Because the punch has some, negative energy on it, right? It's sapping their energy. Very shot fighters will even drop their hands. You'll notice they have no defense. It deteriorates. It falls apart as they then get hit with a series of shots. Right? The defense starts to fall apart. The reaction you would expect, guy puts a hand up, guy rolls, is slow in coming. Right? So there are moments in the fight where a shot fighter will get hit with a haymaker and just freeze. Just stand there. Get hit with a few other shots. You'll also notice too with shot fighters, the punch resistance isn't there. When they were young, they got hit, they laughed, they kept coming forward on their front foot. Right? Some fighters get hit, they laugh, they shake their head. They want to convince us or fool us into believing the punch had nothing on it. With shot fighters, they get hit, they're visibly hurt. They can't even hide the fact that the punch resistance they had years ago is no longer there with them. Right? So, in my opinion, you notice that as you watch what the guy does defensively. when you look at the guy's offensive game, you'll notice a shot fighter has decreased volume. He's not throwing what he used to throw. Right? Maybe he's seeing the openings. He can't react fast enough to take advantage of the openings. Let me also point out too, because boxing is violent, guys are getting hit in the head. You'll notice too with shot fighters a certain lack of coordination. It's one thing to miss a punch. You'll notice that shot fighters are missing punches by wide margins. Right? You'll notice that shot fighters can't take a step forward and tie up their opponents. Right? They look uneasy doing so. Right? The guy's body, the guy's movement just isn't the same. You don't notice shot fighters dancing around the ring because that would take too much coordination. Now, I've looked at Juan Manuel Lopez. He's been the victim of some pretty bad beatings. And in my opinion, if you look at the Orlando Salido fights, he's not who he was. If you look at the Mikey Garcia fight, he's not who he was. I know he's only 30. I don't consider those fights to be bad days. I consider those fights to show some physical deterioration. Right? A guy whose reflexes aren't what they were. When I say it's over for him, again, he's a big-time puncher. He can catch anyone. He would have a puncher's chance against anyone. Good luck staying upright if he hits you flush. But the point is, apart from that, he's going to struggle. Now, he's lucky to be fighting Ponce de Leon, because if he were fighting a more mobile fighter, the way to beat a shot fighter, in my opinion, is to force him to use coordination. It's to move around the ring. It's to use speed and movement. Because, of course, a shot fighter has decreased coordination. Right? He's not who he once was. So if you can force him to move, if you have the speed where his slow reflexes can't react, then a shot fighter will, in my opinion, fall apart. Juan Manuel Lopez has been fighting mainly fighters who are right in front of him. Just keep in mind that if he does fight a guy with movement, he's going to be in a whole lot of trouble. I don't care where the fight's taking place. Let's talk about this fight. Let's talk about another problem Lopez is going to have. In my opinion, Lopez is really, just based on how he moves and how he carries himself in the ring, I believe he's really a right-handed guy fighting out of a southpaw stance. Right? So he's bludgeoning you with his right hand, which is actually his dominant hand. But he has that out front. Now, let me just say, and I've said this in other videos, that's going to drain his coordination even more. Because it takes more effort to be in an unnatural stance than it does to be in a natural stance. Right? Understand, just like you have a dominant hand, let's say you write with your right hand, you also have a dominant foot. Right? If you were playing football, European football, or let's say American football, and you had to kick the ball, let's say you're a kicker, you'll want to kick it with a particular leg every time. Right? So the problem is these inverted guys, they're unnatural, because understand, they have to coordinate their entire body to be inverted. It's not as simple as just changing your stance, right? Because your legs are also a specific foot dominant. I wouldn't be surprised if Lopez, when he kicks, if he plays football, kicks with his right leg, right? I believe he probably writes with his right hand. So what you have here, in my opinion, is a guy with decreased coordination. Just looking at the lack of reflexes in his earlier fights. The pauses when he gets hit with shots, right? The Salido fights, he gets hit with shots, doesn't have anything defensively. Gets hit and is just standing in front of Salido. Right? I believe his coordination's going to drop even more when he has to remember how to be coordinated in his unnatural southpaw stance. Right? So, he knocked out Ponce de Leon years ago in the first round of a fight. This was when he was in his prime. This was when he was younger. Right? Now he's no longer in his prime. Now he's older, and now he, in my opinion, is hurting coordination-wise, reflex-wise. The reflexes aren't there. He still has a big punch. Ponce has a huge punch. Keep in mind, Ponce just a few fights ago, forget the Abner Maris fight, just a few fights ago, stopped Johnny Gonzalez. Right? My point is this. The way I'd bet this fight is to take both guys by knockout. It's high risk. Fight goes the distance, you lose it all. Right? But I like to take both guys by knockout. I don't want to play with over-unders because, of course, I want all 12 rounds for the stoppage. I don't want a situation where there's a stoppage, but then someone's going to tell me, you know what? This is a half a round over the over-under. You lose. Right? I want all 12 rounds. So I see a knockout in this fight. I see a guy who, in my opinion, is past his prime, who it's over for, who will never get back to who he was. Fighting in front of a home crowd, fights in Puerto Rico, that wants to see their guy win in spectacular fashion, right, by KO, right, and he's fighting a guy who has a huge punch for the weight class. Right? If you don't know, Ponce is one of the hardest punchers out there. Let me also add, too, that Juan Manuel Lopez has had major stamina problems. Take a look at the last 2 rounds of the Rogers-Motagua fight from a few years ago. Now pay attention to the length of this fight. I believe it's only 10 rounds, which increases the risk that the fight could go the distance, right? Something we don't want. But just understand, I'm expecting Lopez to have even more pronounced stamina problems. Because one of the hallmarks of a shot fighter is that the guy's stamina starts to fall apart as we get to the later rounds. And even a younger Juan Manuel Lopez had stamina problems. So rather than pick a side, I'm going to just say inside of the distance. Right? The bet I like, and you'll have to play with it based on the odds, is both men to win the fight by KO. Right? I think Ponce might have a future. Right? I view Lopez going forward as only having a puncher's chance in his fights. We'll see what happens here. Keep in mind, Ponce has been fighting A-level fighters. He went the distance with Adrian Broner. He beats Johnny Gonzalez. He gets knocked out by Abner Maris. These are some of the biggest names around the weight classes where Ponce de Leon is. right? So I understand Ponce has had some losses on his record. Fair enough. I understand Ponce was knocked out earlier by Juan Manuel Lopez. But, again, Father Time gets to all of us. Boxing has a neurological component. I don't believe Juan Manuel Lopez is who he once was. I see some slippage. I believe this fight is up for grabs. The way I'm playing it is to take both guys to win it by knockout. Let me hear from you. And understand, that's high risk. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for us here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Let me add a further caveat to the discussion on shot fighters. There's a riveting dialogue going on right now in the United Kingdom. You have a major boxing event coming up there. Carl Froch against George Groves. And you have some members of British boxing royalty. Guys like Naseem Hamed, who I still maintain is one of the hardest punchers I've ever seen. Guys like him, former champions, have weighed in and have said that they believe Carl Froch, very skilled technical guy, that Carl Froch is past his expiration date and that he should retire. Right? The argument is that the reflexes aren't there anymore. It's an open question. Okay? Because there is a difference between having average reflexes, not being gifted reflex-wise, not being fast, right? Being a little bit slower-handed, and being a shot neurologically impaired fighter. Right? There's a big difference. And so as you Google Froch Groves, and as you see other fighters, other than Prince Naseem Hamed, express their opinions that Carl Froch should retire, just understand what they're saying is that he's not who he was. That there's neurological impairment. That there's been a dimming of his reflexes. That the first fight against George Groves wasn't a bad night. Rather, it's a sign of things to come in Froch's career. Now, Carl Froch has openly laughed at the suggestion, right? There are fighters who you wondered about who then were able to reboot their career. There was a time, I'll be as blunt as possible, when I looked at Vladimir Klitschko and I wondered about him. Apparently I wasn't the only one. His big brother, Vitaly Klitschko, told him it's time to give up the sport. Then, of course, Vladimir gets back the heavyweight title, has been on a run ever since then. Right? And so it's possible for a guy to look very bad in fights and then somehow right the ship. But keep an eye on Carl Froch in the George Groves fight. What you want to look for are his reflexes. Right? When George Groves throws shots, is Carl Froch seeing the shot coming? And is he rolling with the punch before the punch gets there? Right? Is Carl Froch reacting to what George Groves does? Or is he merely getting by with technique? Has his hands up, is blocking shots with his hands without having to move them, right? Is sticking a jab out, is following a script to keep himself out of harm's way, right? If you see him rolling with punches, looking interactive, even though he can't match, let's be blunt, he can't match George Groves in hand speed, right? Groves is just a better athlete at this point, right? Even if he can't match George Groves, as long as he's interactive with George Groves, then he's not a shot fighter. But if you see him getting hit, if you see his hands dropping, if you see him unable to cover up, if he looks disoriented in the ring, right? looks like his coordination isn't what it once was, then you need to consider the possibility that the wars that he has been in, right? 2 wars with just Mikhail Kessler. Think about it. That Brian McGee fight, go back, look at that fight. That's a war, folks. Right? The Jermaine Taylor fight had rough moments for both fighters. The wars Carl Froch has been in might be catching up with him. It's an open question. In boxing, these things are typically decided in the ring. Just understand, though, that these are the kind of things we need to think about in a sport where, some great fighters right now who have retired have slurred speech. Okay, so just food for thought. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments in the comment section here. Tell us how you determine whether a fighter is a shot fighter, whether a fighter it's over for, what the criteria you use in judging whether a fighter is no longer himself. Also, tell me if you feel I'm being fair here in this video. To Juan Manuel Lopez. Thanks for stopping by.